Don't you even dare!
Temple of the Ocean King.
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 Temple of the Ocean King. If you've never played Phantom Hourglass, then you at least know about this dungeon. And most people know that this is one of, if not, the most infamous of all dungeons in the entire franchise. One of the more common ones I hear from Zelda, at least. You've probably heard the Temple of the Ocean King always sandbagged as the worst Zelda dungeon.
Oh, God.
And it's not even bad!
I never played Phantom Hourglass.
Hate
I
that
played
stage.
Phantom Hourglass.
And I'm not gonna lie, this kind of bugs me. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a bad dungeon. It has some boneheaded decisions that sounded good on paper, but just didn't turn out well on execution. But on the other hand, really? Temple of the Ocean King? The #1 worst dungeon in Zelda history? And this isn't even like a one-time thing. This has happened consistently throughout nearly every countdown I've seen talking about worst Zelda dungeons. Now, I played a lot of Zelda games. Every single Nintendo title aside from the CDI trilogy. And I played Phantom Hourglass a good number of times. It's probably one of the most replayed Zelda games in my history. But I've never been so bothered to consider it the worst Zelda dungeon of all time. It doesn't even come in my personal top 10. So now I really gotta ask myself this. Am I missing something? With Jaywitz being one of the earliest haters of this dungeon, it was a lot easier to shrug my head and ignore it. After all, it was a fresh take at the time. But with the likes of Josh Scorcher and Quarter Guy continuing on with this absolutely befuddling trend, and unintentionally swaying away newcomers from the game...
You see, the thing is, I never played Phantom Hourglass, but literally I watched Josh Scorcher's video where he talked about that, and I felt pain just listening to that segment.
This eventually inspired me to get into action. And so, in April of 2024, I decided to replay Phantom Hourglass once again, and I needed to answer the question, is Temple of the Ocean King actually that bad? So here we go, let's dive right in, and let's go through the full experience. And there we are. Our first visit to the Temple of the Ocean King. Thankfully, I can just tell you straight up, the first visit is like no issue at all. So before we really start things off, I need to lay a little bit of groundwork. First off, there are 6 total visits to the Temple of the Ocean King. Or 8 times if your name happens to be Vic HD.
We go to the Temple of the Ocean King, then return to the Temple of the Ocean King. Temple of the Ocean King. Temple of the Ocean King!
Oops. Now, depending on who you ask, there can be as many as 6 visits and as little as 3. Now, the reason I can say 3 is because the first visit is more of an introduction and has you go through a completely unique section of the dungeon. The 5th visit is optional, which we'll get into a bit later, and the 6th visit has a completely different gameplay style altogether. So with that said, if you don't count the first visit, much like myself, then that does put a limit on how many times you actually visit the place. And if you do count it, then that means people have this much of a hatred of this dungeon, despite the fact that this introduces one of the best characters in the Zelda franchise, and subsequently gives us one of the funniest scenes in the entire game. Not a chance. I love this, man. And considering this was 3 to 4 years before they introduced the Groose, that's saying something. Beyond that, there's not really much else to really talk about. You get a key, you open a door, you solve a puzzle or two. Bing, bang, boom. It's really just harmless. And taking into account that I don't really consider this a visit, it's high time we move on and get to the real meat and potatoes. No. Oh. That was So for me, this is the actual first visit, and that's because this is where the gimmick starts. To inform new fans and to refresh old ones, here's how it goes. The Phantom Hourglass is a device that allows you to traverse into the unsafe zones in Temple of the Ocean King. Well, without taking damage. The catch now is that you're on the clock with the Phantom Hourglass. Thankfully, you're given 10 minutes on your first go, but as you make more visits, there's more dungeon you have to explore, and small increments of time to actually add to the clock. This first visit is actually great. It tells you all the basic rules you need to know. When you're on purple, you're safe. Everywhere else is where the clock starts ticking. Meaning you gotta make sure you plan out your decisions before actually following through with them. And then you can have these pots, these red pots. No! Because if not only are you wasting your time, but you make yourself easy targets for the phantoms. Animated suits of armor roaming the dungeons that can slash your health and steal 30 seconds of time from the hourglass. It may sound daunting at first, but really they just act as punishments for noobs playing carelessly. And... oh, shoot. Crap. Yeah, I played dumb. I just... play like an idiot. Now granted, there are some annoying parts of this dungeon. Lugging around the forest gems can be painfully slow at times, but all in all, it's pretty snappy. But here's the thing, this is merely a fraction of what we're dealing with. Also, according to Quarter Guy, walking is considered challenging enough to be a puzzle.
So you go through the first puzzles again.
There's another Buton. 30 seconds. Awesome. Fire. Oh, really? Really? So this is the point where you realize, oh, we're doing this now. This is where you're gonna understand where the critiques are actually coming from. Because this is the point when newcomers start to realize how many trips they're gonna have to make here, alongside the floors compounding on themselves with every visit. Now, while the Phantom Hourglass resets itself on every visit, the big trade-off comes in the form of resetting the dungeon in its entirety, save for a few specific treasure you gained along the way. If you're not catching my drift, let me put it this way. You not only have to explore new floors of the dungeon, but you also have to take on the floors you previously cleared, as unaltered as they were. That means you gotta get those keys again, you gotta get those force gems, and you gotta dodge the same phantoms. Occasionally with a vengeance. And anything you've slain, any buttons you pressed, any torches you lit, any walls you blasted. All reset. Now, that sounds pretty bad, but there is one nice little thing they do for you. See, this dungeon is intended to be replayed, and retreading the old floors only gets easier, rewarding even, with the items you get from dungeons you explore. You're now able to access the shortcuts these floors provide. Take the first floor, for instance. You could do everything you did in the previous run, or you could blast this wall with your fresh new bombs, making the first floor much less of a time waster. Now, a lot of detractors consider this more of a silver lining for a bad dungeon. I don't know if it's just me, but I like to see the positive spin on this. So you're doing the dungeon again, but at the very least, it's like taking a completely different perspective of the place. It's kind of like a remix of what you've already played, and a fun experiment of incorporating the new with the old. So, I legit forgot that you could, like, do this. Like this, and boing. Classic. So while I don't agree with the final product itself, I do at least appreciate the little things they do in the level design to make things a little bit more streamlined. And if we're going off just these 3 visits, this is still better than at least half the dungeons I've played in Zelda games. And I played the full campaign of Triforce Heroes. Also! Oh, I would be remiss if I forgot about this moment. So I'm curious if I can do this now. It worked! Yes! Alright, now come on. If you actually played this back in the day, even haters would admit this was one of the coolest things ever. Closing the DS screen has got to be one of the most creative methods of puzzle solving. The only other time I've actually seen closing the DS as a gameplay mechanic is in Hotel Dusk. That's just crazy. Also, Phantom Eyes. They're just cringy nothing burgers. Later, idiot. Okay, so let's just do the tried and true. Oh, Sam's like, no. So when people are talking about how bad Temple of the Ocean King is, they're talking about this visit. The third theoretical visit is where the problems start showing up, but the third real visit, i.e. the fourth one, the one we're talking about right here, is where the problems start showing up full force. Now, for those of you who remember Phantom Hourglass pretty thoroughly, you might remember there's a warp skip halfway through the dungeon at the cost of time related to your most recent run. This is a good thing. What's not a good thing is that they could have clearly done this earlier. Now, prior to this visit, you go to Zeus's Island to get more information about what to do in the story, but you also get a Triforce insignia to draw on the door that you originally drew the Phantom Hourglass with. This Triforce, in turn, gets you to the room where the warp point is. What sucks is that you can't access this midway point in the third visit, even if players knew about the Triforce insignia beforehand. Here I am drawing it in the fourth visit, and the results are as intended. But here I am drawing in the third visit with no dice. This could have been an easy time-saving measure for returning players, but they didn't do it. Why? I mean, I get why, because that's how the plot progresses, but it comes at the cost of the player's convenience. I think if this part of the game was a little bit more tightly scripted and a lot less free, then there likely wouldn't be as much of a problem. This visit could have been so much better if returning players with the foresight could do what they wanted and saved 6 floors of time. But you know what? I think this is neither here nor there anymore. Let's talk about the new floors. These floors suck. Now, before this point, you were usually tackling the floors as individual floors, but now you're constantly going up and down the floors trying to figure out what to do, which is a very bad first impression. But wait, there's more. You gotta put these shaped gems here, and then you gotta put them somewhere else. You're constantly put in danger of being spotted with these new sound floors you gotta walk quietly through. There's this trapdoor that I fell for. Oh, that's mean. Oh, that's mean. Twice. Dang it, I fell for it again. And then there's this invisible section. God, I hate this invisible section. You're supposed to draw in where the assumed bridge is with the map to remind you in future sessions, but other than that, it's kind of a leap in faith, because they don't really give you any other hints to line you up. With constantly having to lug around these jewels up until the 9th floor, this easily is the worst visit in the entire game. It is very easy to cut it close in time, or even straight up run out and rely on your hearts. And if you mess up, if you game over, back to the beginning, buddy. When people talk about this dungeon, this section is what comes to mind. It is by far the worst part of the game. Yet I wouldn't call this the worst dungeon. Not by a long shot. Oh heck. Okay, we're good. We Gucci. I'm not gonna lie, this is still kind of fun. Now, before I start off with the 5th visit, I think Chugga can say it best here.
From here, we already have every item needed to open every door, except for the last one that Oshus and Bellum are fighting behind. The challenge presents itself of, do you think, with your limited tools and less time in the Phantom Hourglass than what they intended, can you get to the next end of the Temple of the Ocean King and get the next sea chart?
That's right. If you're daring enough, this section can be cheesed in the 4th visit. Granted, it's going to be hard as heck. And admittedly, this is something I'd love to do on my own time. But honestly, other than that, I don't really got much to say about this section of the dungeon. At this point, there's not much new, save for a new phantom type. There's this section with all these bridges you gotta unlock, and then the semi-final floor can get a little bit long as well. But in comparison to everything before, this actually feels kind of manageable. Couple that with a checkpoint, and honestly, you're in for a good time. It's a good, worthwhile challenge. Granted, I don't like retreading the floors from the 4th visit, but I actually do have fun with this. So with everything said, I'd like to make a quick recap. As a standalone, the 4th visit is the only bad visit, and even then, that would barely make my top 10 for a worse dungeon. To me, this is less rage-inducing and or frustratingly monotonous, and more just kind of a sour note. And if we're combining every visit so far, the full experience is mid, at worst. At best, I think it's actually kind of fun.
Now, I know in recent years people have been defending this dungeon and Phantom Hourglass a lot more. To me, though, no matter how palatable you make this place, it does not excuse that this dungeon is the main reason why people dislike Phantom Hourglass.
I honestly think people are just whining too hard.
Did Vince just seriously tell Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass fans to cope?
Yeah. I guess so. So yeah, the worst is behind us now. And with that, the best part of the game is about to begin. Okay, now we come to the fun part. We got the Phantom Sword, we got the ability to slay phantoms now, and let's have some fun. Yeah, simple as. So on one hand, yes, we are in fact going through this dungeon up to our 6th time. Point taken. Counterpoint. Revenge! This right here makes every other visit worth it. Boom! I tell you, getting the means to kill the phantoms, these beings that constantly harass you throughout every other visit, is cathartic. Even genuine, unabashed haters of this dungeon can at least admit that this is an unironically fun part. It is actually worth it to go through the entire dungeon as a marathon, just because it is just that fun to obliterate everything in your sight.
One of the few redeemable aspects of this dungeon is that when you do obtain the Phantom Sword at the end of the game, you can finally slay all of those phantoms. And I have to admit, it does feel pretty good.
I think that's one thing that the Countdown community just does not understand, at least as far as this game is concerned. Payoff.
Is it as frustrating or tedious as the Water Temple? Yeah, actually, probably more.
I get it. You know, doing it multiple times throughout the adventure, that's kind of annoying. I will admit that. For the crap you have to put up with in this dungeon, I think there's enough good in this dungeon to outweigh any bad that I've witnessed. Yeah, you put up with all that crap, but your reward is pretty fun. Also, one thing I tend to notice is that people tend to neglect the fight with Bellum. I mean, it's not like a crazy good fight, but I think it's one of the better ones out there. You're primarily using the grappling hook, the bow and arrow, and the Phantom Sword to attack this guy. It is a multi-phase fight for sure. And if you were like most people and hated the music from the dungeon theme,
and the music sucks too,
then at the very least, Bellum's theme is actually kind of a bop. And that final phase. Ooh, that final phase. Oh, that's time-stopping abilities. Oh, this is beautiful. I could stare at this for hours. So yeah, your view of the Temple of the Ocean King is heavily dependent on whether or not you believe this is a good enough payoff. I personally think it is. but I could see why a lot of people would not think that.
The whole thing transmutes a mishmash of smaller problems into a chimera of tedium, boredom, and frustration.
Skill issue, honestly.
Okay, this was a good one. Got him! This is actually like a better fight than I remember it being. Since the first fight with Bellum is where I'd consider the end point of this dungeon, I feel like I can get a proper read on how to defend this. First off, it's a handheld title. A DS game even. The DS was designed to be picked up and put down for smaller play sessions. Considering every trek takes about 30 or so minutes to go through on average, possibly even less if you factor in the Linebeck visit, I think the developers at least thought that much ahead. Trust me when I say I would rather put up with 6 instances of 30 minutes dealing with Temple of the Ocean King than the actual 3 hours it takes to put up with the Water Temple. Most water temples are not designed to be picked up and put down, especially with much more archaic map designs like in the N64 duology. The DS not only gives you accurate information about what's going on each floor, it gives you super detailed things a map can't ordinarily tell you. Phantom locations, phantom sight ranges, spike locations, whether or not the spike is actually active, and the updates. Oh, the glorious updates! People do not give the map design of Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks enough credit. Simply because, oh, Temple of the Ocean King it's a bad dungeon. Look at these maps, they're so beautiful, and you take them for granted. What I also really want to acknowledge is that, yes, you are going back and forth in this dungeon throughout the entire adventure, but I really do think the designers did think about the player in mind, just in other ways. Not only is this world map incredibly compact, especially considering the Wind Waker that came before it, but there are also no wind controls to deal with, plenty of warp spaces to discover, and the island of Murkay, where the temple is housed in, is in a centralized location and is also your hub for things such as treasure appraisal and ship modification. Okay, so, funny story. What happened was that I accidentally ran out of power on my phone, so it kind of shut off. I had to redo the ghost ship, and all of the Temple of the Ocean King up until this point, all over again. I figured I'd just save and quit like this, and I found out that saving and quitting in dungeons just takes you back to the beginning of the dungeon, so I had to do this again for a 3rd time. I was like, wow, I'm not even bothered. I think Temple of the Ocean King, despite its flaws, still works masterfully as a handheld dungeon. Now, this just might be a theory of mine, but I think a lot of people who play Phantom Hourglass go in with a console mindset. With the expectations of a console game, handheld games, especially the older ones, pretty much had to be sneaky with a lot of their padding in order to feel a fraction as long as most console games. And despite those limitations, or rather because of them, you get a lot more interesting creations coming out of handheld gaming. Again, this dungeon does have strengths, whether it be effective use of the memo feature, the introduction of Linebeck, a map that displays active information about your surroundings, a genuinely cool final phase to an otherwise pretty alright boss, and probably one of the coolest ideas for a puzzle solution. Like, so very frequently do these strengths get constantly brushed under the rug for its weaknesses. That's just not cool. And that's why I'm here. To tell you, play the game, form your opinions. If you like it, you like it. And if you don't, hey, at least you heard me out. I think that's all I gotta say, so I'll leave you on that. And this goes without saying, but don't harass anybody that I mentioned. If they happen to see this video, and they're interested to talk, then we'll talk.